Thanks for coming. My name is Jennifer Weymouth, and I currently run a small boutique design agency in the Junction called Weymouth Creative. Thanks to the RGD for inviting me here today. They asked me if I could share some lessons I've learned throughout my career, but before I share those, I'll just give you a quick summary of my experience. I graduated from OCAD, or OCA as it was called way back then, from the C&D, or Communication and Design program. Over my career, I've worked for a few design firms, with the majority of my experience gained at one place, which was Oxygen Design Agency, where I spent 15 years. And just for the young designers out there, I stayed there a long time. I joined there as a senior designer, and then after 4 years, I was made a partner and a design director, and then ultimately became a creative director. And then recently, 3.5 years ago, I decided to go on my own and started a boutique design firm. So today, since I think most of you are students or recent grads, it would be helpful to share some lessons that I've summarized into these. 5 things your creative director never wants to hear. So I'll just jump right into the first one. I don't know. I'm sure I said this many times as a junior designer when my creative director would ask me why I did something a certain way or why something was missing in my layouts. This is all about being accountable. Being accountable for your work is something I learned early in my career. Taking ownership of your work means being responsible. Always do your homework, research, read the brief, review your own work. Sounds simple, but it's so important. A lot of people don't read their work. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I learned that it wasn't acceptable to make excuses or play the blame game for why things went missing, why they were incomplete or off-brand or spelled wrong, or even why production files were built poorly or just plain sloppy. Taking accountability will earn you respect as a designer and gain trust from your creative director ultimately and other team members. So my best advice is to really understand every aspect of your project before you begin. So that's from the strategic objectives to budget parameters to the brand vision and all the final specs that you're given. Moving on to number 2. I just really love this typeface. I can honestly say I'm sure as a young designer there were times when I fell in love with typefaces and tried to force them into my concepts and layouts. But the lesson here is really concept is king. As cliche as it is, it's totally true. So one thing that was drilled into my head from my time at OCAD was that without a concept, you have nothing but a pretty picture. So if you have a killer concept, everything will feed off this big idea, make perfect strategic sense, and can be easily rationalized. So basing a brand identity on a new trendy typeface, or designing an ad campaign for that matter on a new photography style that you've fallen in love with, rather than choosing one for strategic reasons, lacks substance and has no story to tell. It has no longevity, and frankly, it'll date before it even hit the street. So often in this business, creative ideas are chosen for subjective reasons rather than objective ones. So it's important to develop your ideas using strong design thinking and a really powerful, solid creative rationale. So here's number 3. Your creative director will definitely not like to hear you say, "I'm not inspired." We've all said this, we've all felt this. I think everyone can agree there are times in the creative process when we're not inspired or just not feeling it. But please don't say this to your creative director. So after all, you've been hired and are being paid to come up with creative ideas. It's important that we stay inspired. We need to feed our creative spirit and try to avoid burnout. We all know it can happen, but there are many ways to stay on top of it. We've all stared at that blank page, waiting for the magic to happen, and it will. I would recommend giving yourself downtime to turn off and recharge your batteries so you can eventually turn back on again later. It's simple things like get outside, explore your city, step away from your computer, as basic as it is, get away from your computer, sketch, break routine, do the opposite, travel. Shift your perspective and you may find solutions in unexpected places. Moving on to number 4. I ran out of time. This never goes over well. We've all said this at one time or another, and we know deadlines can be challenging, but it all comes down to time management. As a junior designer, it's difficult to assess how long things may take. This comes with years of experience. So until then, it's important to be vocal with your account team or senior creatives that are working with you to bring up any concerns you might have with timing before it's too late. Don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. It's much wiser to ask for help than to panic the day of a presentation and risk letting down your team, or even worse, losing a client. It's also important to, in addition to meeting client deadlines, during the creative process, to build in time and carve out time needed to have internal reviews along the way with your creative director. These internal deadlines are really important, need to be taken seriously. It's your opportunity to present your killer ideas, really sell yourself and show off your mad design thinking skills that you have. And it's so important that you do this. So be prepared, rationalize your ideas, and put in the time to craft and really execute your creative concepts. As a designer, I know how easy it can be to get hung up on the visual look of something and just spend hours obsessing over little design details. But take a step back and really ensure, like Michael said earlier, if you've been asked to develop 3 distinctly different concepts for something, that you actually are, and that they're not just 3 different visual solutions for the same idea. So my advice to you is really make the effort, push yourself, and give each project the time it needs for the creative thinking it deserves. You'll definitely be rewarded for it. Okay, on to number 5. It just wasn't working. So there will be times in your career when you'll be asked to develop an idea or solve a problem that you don't necessarily agree with or just aren't passionate about. The easy way out is just to say, oh, I tried it, but it just wasn't working. I would say in my experience that 9 times out of 10, you can make it work and solve the problem. This is a lesson in perseverance. I would really push yourself, be positive, don't get discouraged or give up, and try again. I really believe that no problem or situation is too difficult that creativity can't solve. And I also feel wholeheartedly and believe that optimism is infectious and it's fundamental to a successful creative environment. You have to believe that something will come from nothing, I was given an inspiring book once by one of my creative directors in the past called It's Not How Good You Are, It's How Good You Want to Be by Paul Arden. And I highly recommend reading this book. It's a little short read, a little pocket Bible. It talks about making the most of yourself and how you can make the unthinkable thinkable and the impossible possible. So my advice is this, and it's a quote from him, from Paul Arden. If you can't solve a problem, it's because you're playing by the rules. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all our presenters. And I'm so happy we're exactly on time. Being Swiss, wearing 2 watches, it can't get better than that. Thanks, guys.